We've been looking at some really thought-provoking material you shared about life's deserts.
Yeah, definitely some interesting perspectives there.
What immediately jumped out, I think, is that these aren't just dead ends, these tough times we go through.
Right, not necessarily barren wastelands.
So our aim today is really to dig into Ruthie Velasquez Paredes' book, How Did You Get to Your Desert?
Mm-hmm.
And sort of pull out what's most important about navigating these challenging experiences, seeing them maybe, well, as significant parts of our journey.
Exactly. It's about reframing how we see these difficult periods. Our sources suggest that while desert, often carries a negative connotation,
Sure.
these times can be surprisingly fertile ground for learning, maybe a crucible for testing our beliefs,
Right.
and even unique opportunities for encountering something greater than ourselves.
And Velasquez Paredes' book really feels like she's speaking from the heart, doesn't it?
It really does.
You see it in the personal touches, dedications, acknowledgments, and the preface. She shares what led her to write it.
Yeah, that prophetic word, but also that internal struggle.
That feeling of being like a clown internally while her ministry was growing externally, that disconnect became her personal desert.
Which highlights such a powerful truth, I think. These deserts aren't always about, external failures or visible hardships.
Right. Sometimes they're deep inside.
Yeah, that gap between how we seem and what's really going on. Her vulnerability there makes the insight so relatable, I feel. It shows you're not alone in that.
Okay, so let's really nail down what we mean by this desert. The book's pretty clear. It's not necessarily, endless sand dunes.
No, not literally.
We're talking about those tough situations, the problems, the disappointments that life throws our way.
Right. And it's interesting, just for a second, looking at literal deserts. Geographically, they cover a massive part of the planet.
How much?
Over 50 million square kilometers. Almost a third of the Earth's landmass.
Wow.
And here's the kicker. Almost half of them are actually coldy deserts.
Cold? Really? I never knew that. It kind of broadens our image of what a desert even is, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And it makes that connection to our own challenging times maybe even more intriguing because our tough times aren't all the same either.
Good point. And the book explores different ways we might understand these deserts. Are they places for learning, for testing?
Or spaces where God reveals something new.
Or maybe a consequence of disobedience. And even maybe sometimes a place we end up through obedience.
That range of interpretations is so important. It really suggests that our mindset, how we frame the desert we're in, profoundly shapes our experience of it.
Yeah. Are you seeing it as just punishment? Or maybe there's an opportunity there.
Glimmers of opportunity for growth or a deeper connection, exactly.
Now, how do we actually find ourselves in these deserts? The book looks at several paths. One that really stood out was disobedience.
The author's own story.
Yeah, feeling led into a hard season after stepping away from her ministry. And that phrase from her friend, 2 bad things will never add up to 1 good thing.
That's so concise, isn't it? But powerful. Often maybe when we're trying to escape one difficult thing, we make choices that just lead us deeper in.
Yeah, her honesty about her own missteps is a valuable, a cautionary tale. It makes you pause.
Definitely.
Another way the book talks about arriving in a desert is just circumstance, external factors we can't control.
Right, like the author and her husband moving to Puerto Rico. That's a powerful example.
They had strong faith, a history of being generous, and then bam, serious economic hardship.
Yeah, the job search struggles, savings dwindling.
Yeah.
It paints a picture of a desert that wasn't self-inflicted,
And what's striking is that contrast with their past. They were used to being the givers.
Exactly. And then suddenly being in need and facing judgment from that other minister who just assumed it was because of sin.
Ouch. That highlights how complex these things are and how quick we can be to judge someone else's situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But their story also shows that growing reliance on God, the miraculous provision, it points to a key lesson: learning true dependence.
Then there's that concept of the dry cistern based on Joseph's story. Really makes you think.
Yeah, the idea that sometimes you're put in a desert not by your choices, but by what others do.
Thrown into an empty cistern, the book contrasts that powerfully with Hagar finding a well in her desert experience.
It explains that difference between a fountain, like God, living water, and just an empty cistern.
That analogy really speaks to those times you feel completely helpless, abandoned, maybe even betrayed.
That emptiness, yeah. But Joseph's story reminds us, even then, there can be a bigger purpose you just can't see yet. Like David in Psalm 40, waiting patiently. trusting.
Interestingly, the book also explores arriving at a desert through, voluntary obedience, a divine appointment.
Like Moses at the burning bush.
Exactly. He's just tending sheep on Mount Horeb, doing his job, and suddenly,
Yeah.
this huge divine encounter and mission.
And it wasn't his plan, right? He was just going about his day. It shows how God can show up in the routine, in what seems like a detour.
Yeah. And the idea that the call often comes through faith, a whisper maybe, not always a big sign. Need to be open to that.
That's a great point. Being open even when things don't immediately make sense.
And then there's the idea of a desert as a call to worship, the author's mother's story, tuberculosis in a sanatorium.
Wow, yeah, that could have been just devastating and isolating.
But it became a place where she cultivated worship, saw miracles, those secret prayer meetings in the bathroom.
Incredible. And the story of Lumi's healing after the prophecy, the description of the wound closing like a tap turning off, so vivid.
It really transforms how you see adversity, doesn't it? Takes suffering and isolation and turns it into, well, a place of spiritual power.
It really does. It echoes stories like David fleeing Saul, finding refuge in the wilderness. Even in barren places, God's presence can be incredibly real.
It really underscores how our response within the desert matters. Seeking God even there.
Absolutely. It can change the nature of the experience.
So if we find ourselves in one of these deserts, what's the point? What are we supposed to be learning?
Well, the book points to several key things. Learning dependence on God is huge, like in the author's Puerto Rico story.
Yeah, that verse from James 1:17, every good gift coming from above, feels relevant.
Totally. And that lesson they learned about needing to receive as well as give, that's profound, actually.
It really is. We often focus on giving, but learning to receive gracefully, that's humility, isn't it? And it acknowledges God as the source.
Right. And their story also points to another purpose, preparation for something greater, that prophetic word about becoming pastors after that hard time.
So the desert can be like a training ground.
Exactly. Foundational steps towards your purpose. The book also mentions the testing of faith, using that rose garden analogy.
Oh, yeah, needing both sun and rain, good times and bad.
Right, and encountering God in a deeper way, like Hagar at the well, naming it Well of the Living Being Who Sees Me.
What a name. It speaks right to that feeling of being seen, understood, even when you're hurting.
It really does. And the book is clear. Humility is often forged in the desert. When we're stripped back, we rely less on ourselves.
Okay, so how do we actually navigate these times? What practical guidance does the book offer?
Well, first and foremost, seems to be waiting on the Lord. Patience. Trusting His timing.
Referencing Proverbs 16.25, right. The way that seems right to us might not be the way.
Exactly. Our instinct might be the quickest escape, but the book encourages seeking God's direction, not just our own solutions.
Another key thing is resisting temptation. Jesus' example in the desert is so powerful here.
Right after his baptism, yeah. Those 3 temptations, turning stones to bread, the temple jump, worshiping Satan for power.
They feel very relevant to our own internal battles in tough times.
Totally. And Jesus' consistent response. It is written, using Scripture as a defense.
It really highlights how vital it is to know and apply God's word, especially then. Like Hebrews 4.1 true says, it's living and active.
And understanding, like James 1 says, that God doesn't tempt us. We're drawn by our own desires. That framework helps. And then Ephesians 6, putting on the whole armor of God. That's practical navigation.
The book also warns about distractions and illusions, mirages in the desert.
Yeah, things that look appealing but lead you further off course. You just stay focused.
That analogy of the lost person with the water bottle and the rusty pump, needing faith and perseverance even when it seems counterintuitive.
It does. It highlights focusing on what's real and lasting, not temporary fixes. And it touches on that danger of spiritual drift. Small steps leading you away from God.
Interestingly, the book suggests sometimes we're in a desert for others, like the shepherd leaving the 99 for the one.
Yeah, referencing John 10.16. The author's mother in the sanatorium is a perfect example. Her difficulty became a way to minister.
So it encourages looking beyond our own pain, maybe serving others even when you're struggling ourselves.
That's a beautiful perspective, often overlooked. Our deserts might have a purpose beyond just us. And the book rightly emphasizes worship.
As a weapon.
As a weapon against discouragement, yeah. And a way to connect with God's presence, especially when you feel alone.
It also talks about prophesying over your desert. Ezekiel and the dry bones, speaking life into dead situations.
That's powerful. And using what you have. like Moses and his staff, or Joel saying, turn plowshares into swords. Use your gifts.
So active steps, not just passively enduring.
Exactly. Engage your faith, your resources. Participate in finding God's way forward.
Now, the book makes a really important distinction here, I think. Not every tough time is a desert in the specific sense.
Right. The author differentiates general trials from these purposeful deserts experienced by believers where there's a sense of God's accompaniment.
That's a key nuance. A true faith context desert has divine intention, God's nearness, even in the hardship.
And it cautions, wisely, against those outside that faith trying to claim promises meant specifically for believers in Jesus.
Good point. The book then challenges our assumptions about where we expect to see God's glory. We often think comfort, right?
But it points to the Israelites murmuring right after the Red Sea miracle.
Yeah. It really highlights our human tendency. Dissatisfaction, blindness to God's power, even when it's right there.
And the contrast between physical thirst, like the Samaritan woman, and that deeper spiritual thirst only God satisfies. Material fixes don't solve spiritual problems.
John 6.63, yeah. And Lazarus' resurrection. Jesus asking Martha, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?
Faith. It's crucial for experiencing God's power.
The book helpfully breaks the desert experience down using 3 pro words: promise, process, purpose.
Yeah, promise first. God's promises are abundant, but they require our submission, our obedience to really take hold.
Thousands in the Bible, but we need to actively engage through faith.
Then there's process. That's the transformative work within us during the desert, like Paul's conversion, becoming more like Christ, sanctification.
And finally, purpose, the reminder that God is intentional, no coincidences. We should seek his direction, not just temporary relief.
Those 3 words give a great framework. It's not just endurance, it's embracing promise, allowing the process, discovering purpose.
The book also gets very personal about community and, well, the lack of it sometimes.
Yeah. Her experience trying to find a church in Puerto Rico.
Whoa.
Visiting 9 different places.
Filling out visitor cards, getting no follow-up, different styles, even that weird one with the supposed gold flakes.
That story really highlights a critical issue, doesn't it? The need for genuine welcome in faith communities.
Absolutely. And the contrast with the 9th church that did call back shows the impact of simple care.
And that sad little story about the homeless man John, with only one friend, Stephen, illustrates how vital connection is. Churches can be that lifeline.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into these deserts, the key takeaways seem to be, well, these aren't just hard times, they're multifaceted.
Yeah, opportunities for learning, growth in faith, encountering God.
They can come from different places, different reasons, and navigating them involves faith, resilience,
and focusing beyond yourself.
And just as the author and so many others have come out stronger, with purpose, you can too.
Absolutely. There's hope in that.
And that leads to our final thought for you today. Maybe take some time to reflect on your own deserts. How did you get there? Or how might you have gotten there?
What are you learning right now? Could there be a bigger purpose unfolding that you maybe can't quite see yet?
Can you view your challenges not just as obstacles, but maybe as opportunities for growth, for encountering the divine?
It's a fundamental shift in perspective, really. Can change everything.
For those of you who might want to connect with Ruthie, maybe a request prayer, her email is pareidesdeemer@yahoo.com.
pareidesdeemer@yahoo.com.
And with that, we just wish you strength and purpose wherever you find yourself right now.